Well, Jeff surprised many of you last week when he told you what the most frequent instruction God gives to the human race is. Do you remember what it was? Fear not, or don't be afraid. Yes, some of you, I know you remembered. If I give you more time, you would have known it. And that's interesting to me. Don't be afraid. The number one command from the Lord, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. When you think about it, it could have been be more loving. And that's a big deal. It certainly is the heart of God that we all learn to be more loving, but that's not it. A lot of writers about spiritual life talk about how we struggle with pride, that at the heart of all human fallenness is pride, but it wasn't don't be proud. That wasn't the number one command. It's not about integrity or walking in the truth, although those are real important things for sure. The most common command given in all of Scripture, Jeff nailed it last week, fear not. Fear not. Don't be afraid. Be strong and courageous. You can trust me, God says. You don't have to be afraid. Fear is a universal thing, isn't it? I read a report several years ago that said all babies are born with just two innate fears. Do you remember what they were? They're the fear of falling. Have you ever a baby just automatically does that when that seems cruel to do that. But you know what I'm talking about? If you've got a baby, you do that. They just do that. And there's a certain fear factor there, but also the fear of loud sounds. That's the only two fears we are born with. Beyond that, all fears that we know are learned fears. You ever thought about what you're afraid of? What really gets next to you? I remember when I was a kid, I don't know how old, 7, 8 years old, maybe older, I'm not sure, but I remember going out to the mailbox to get the mail and then turning toward the house and realizing it's dark. Do you remember that kind of a feeling? And then you suddenly hear in the bushes, you hear stuff and you hear the birds and you suddenly think somebody's out there, and suddenly you break out running as fast as, did anybody else do that, or am I the only guy that did that? I did that when I was a kid, and you get back to the house and your mom says, what's wrong? It's like, nothing, I'm fine, but you just were frightened for just that moment. You were so afraid. As a child, lots of things were scary to me. I was in elementary school in 1968 when Robert Kennedy was assassinated and Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And my afternoon shows, my Raider friends remember this, our afternoon shows were just totally preempted because it was full day. It was talking about these deaths of these famous people. And that's the first time death ever kind of became real to me. And I remember thinking, I am terribly afraid. I am terribly afraid. This past week, my grandson Avery was over at our house, and he was sneaking into our pantry and he was getting snacks. And Jane and I were totally watching him, but we're grandparents, we're sending him home. We don't care. It's like, eat whatever you want. We don't care. And so we're watching him, and then I'm watching him. I'm in the other room, but I can see him, and I see him decide that he could actually get into the pantry and he could pull the door to, and then he has all of this bounty, all of this treasure that he could just eat. And so I'm watching this. He doesn't know I'm watching this. And he went into the pantry. I'm watching him. He pulled the door to, and it clicked, and he screamed and started banging on the door, and he was so afraid. It was really funny. I wish you could have seen it. He was petrified. At this stage of life, really the only thing that petrifies me is when I get a package that I have ordered online and it says some assembly required. That is something that I just think, oh God, I can't do this. But we know not all fear is bad. Some fear is actually good fear. Good fear teaches us to respect appropriate boundaries, and that's important for all of us. There are times when we need to feel fear. There are places where if you go, there's an increased chance of getting hurt, so you need to have fear there. Good fear alerts us to dangers, real dangers. It keeps kids from touching hot stoves or going out too deep in the ocean, ignoring the potential for riptides. But then there are bad fears. That's what we primarily are talking about here. Bad fears paralyze us from doing what we know we need to do. Bad fear is a kind of distorted fear. It's exaggerated, out of touch with reality. It's a chronic sense of worry and anxiety. So you have a good fear and you have a bad fear. Just to make sure you get the distinction, let me ask you a few questions, and please answer in full voice. We'll see if you know kind of what I'm talking about. First off, the fear that keeps children from playing in the middle of a busy street, is that good fear or bad fear? This was not a trick question. That is bad fear. The fear that keeps you from interviewing for your all-time dream job or maybe stepping out and starting a business, is that good fear or bad fear? That's bad fear. Okay, you're catching on. The fear that keeps you from sharing your deepest, truest opinions to the judge after he has found against you in a disputed traffic case. Is that good fear or bad fear? That's good fear. That's very, very good fear. One more, the fear that keeps you from buying the latest and greatest flat screen TV until you talk it over with your spouse. Is that good fear or bad fear? That's a split on that one. That's a split. Y'all need to probably talk that one over. I believe the scripture suggests that fear at its most commonly experienced by most of us is not a good thing. When we experience it, we have to wrestle with it. We have to overcome it. Over and over in the Bible, it's explained that it's a mindset that makes the difference. It's not the circumstance. The circumstances happen to all people. It is the mindset that the individual has that allows them to walk through the difficulty. For example, Moses sends out 12 spies. He says, we've got to find out if we can actually go into the promised land. You remember the story. They look at the exact same things. 10 come back and say, we can't go into the promised land. There are two big enemies there. They're too powerful. There's no way we can succeed there. But 2, a man named Caleb and a man named Nun, Joshua, they came back and said, absolutely, we can do this. Same circumstance. Just 2 different ideas. We see it in a young shepherd boy named David. Everybody else saw Goliath and they cowered from him. David saw Goliath and said, God is bigger than he is. I can do battle with him. God will see me through. The disciples were on the boat with Jesus, and Jesus was asleep in one corner of the boat. No problem. The waves came up, and the disciples were frightened. They were looking around them, and they were so afraid. Jesus was calm. Same circumstance. Some had unbelievable fear, and some were able to walk in faith. It's a mindset. It's a perspective. It's the ability to look at a situation and be able to get the strength that you need to plow through it, to go ahead. All of us have that initial fear response, but some have the ability to walk through it. And it affects all of us. Perspective. It's a big deal. Perspective is a sense of proportion. It's the ability to sort out what's a big deal and what's not a big deal. An unhealthy fear is the product of an off-kilter sense of perspective. It's the single reason why God says over and over and over again, don't be afraid. This is a beautiful life. I want to walk with you through it, but you can't have this distorted perspective because it is freezing you up. You need to be able to walk with me and experience things at a deeper level than you ever knew. This is an adventuresome life, and you're living it cowed down in your living room, scared to death. Don't be afraid. So what I want to do today is I want to quickly run through what happens if you don't overcome your fear. And some of you maybe don't look like you're afraid, but you're struggling with fears too. We all do. What happens if you don't overcome your fears? And then very quickly, what are some things you can do that'll give you some power to be able to walk through them? So quickly, I want to go through this. Here's the first thing I want to say. If you live with a fear mindset, it will eat away at your sense of self-worth. If you live with a fear mindset, it will eat away at your sense of self-worth. It will erode your ability to believe in your own value as someone who's been made in the very image of God. Psychologists and counselors have long been intrigued by the connection between low self-esteem and fear. Now, some people have low self-esteem because they were in terrible family situations, and I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about there are other people who by all indications should have high self-esteem, but for some reason they don't, and psychologists say one of the big reasons is they have never learned to overcome fear. And because they don't overcome fear, they're paralyzed. And these are people that are attractive. These are people who are talented. These are people who have a real winsome spirit. But deep down, when you counsel with them or you find out what's ticking underneath, they feel so unworthy. The most recent studies discovered that one component of low feelings of self-worth is this. When you face a difficult situation, a fear-producing situation, do you take action and face it head on, or do you avoid it? Do you bail on it in the moment? Do you wimp out? Do you run and hide? Or do you say, no, I've got this. I'll stand up, and I don't know what the outcome will be, but I will stand up and I will face this fear. Here's what the psychologists found out. When people take action, even though the things don't always turn out like they had hoped, they still get a surge of delight inside of them. Do you know what I'm talking about? When you face a fear and you do something, there is a sense of delight inside of you. I did a hard thing. I took on a difficult challenge. I faced my fear directly. When you do that, you grow. You get this sense of strength, this sense of personhood, this sense of, this is awesome. I've told you this story, but it's so true, and it just resonates with me here. When I was a kid, I was intimidated by a bully that always stalked me at the ball field. Stalked me. We'd go to the ball field for Little League. This bully was always there and always just giving me so much trouble. And I would come home and I would whine to my dad, and my dad finally said, "Son, you've got to stand up." And it's like, that's the last thing I wanted to hear. This is a frightening thing. I want him to take care of it. I don't want to take care of it. He said, "You've got to take care of it." So I remember finally getting the courage. I've got to do something. We were at the ball field, and there was one field nobody was playing on. The other fields, people were there, but the bully was on that field, and I knew I had to go to the bully, and I had to say, "No more, no more. I'm not your," what was the Allman Brothers song? Whipping post. I'm not the whipping post anymore. And so if you can envision a young kid kind of figure this whole thing out, walking across this ball field to the bully in the middle of the ball field. And I remember saying to her, "Listen to me. Listen to me. You are not going to bully me anymore." And I promise you, she punched me right in the mouth. So it didn't work out like I wanted it to. And that's true. That's Chuck Paris' sister. It is totally true. It didn't work out like I wanted it to. But I felt better about myself for just a minute, except for the busted lip. I felt a lot better about myself. So that's the point through this. Your self-esteem is at risk if you are always shrinking from doing that thing you know you need to do. When there's a bully that's picking on somebody and you know you should say something. When somebody is saying profane things in your house and you know you need to say, "Not here. We don't talk about people like that here." When a boss is abusing you, you have the courage with respect to say, "That's not the way that we can work here." And when you do, even if the result doesn't turn out maybe somebody gets up and leaves your house and they don't come back. But when you have done it in a kind way, but you have stood up for what is right, your self-esteem grows. And to not do that, even if you are bright and shiny on the outside, means you will have a smaller heart and a smaller life. So that's an important thing to remember. Second thing is this: if you live with a fear mindset, you will experience stagnation in your life instead of growth. Your life cannot grow unless you face some real fears and walk through them. Now, I'll give you an example. 24 years ago, probably 25 years ago, I sensed that God wanted me to start the Village. The Village was going to be a unique place, a different place. It was going to be a place where people were shown love and respect, where no judging was going to be a part of who we are. We would do the loving. God can do his judging, however he wants to do it. We're just going to love people, and that was the way we set it up. But 25 years ago, I was scared. I had been kind of feeling this pull to do this, and everything in me said, "You can't do that. You're going to fail. You're going to step out, and it's going to be the biggest failure. It's going to be on the front page of the paper. Loser, Ray Waters tried to do this thing that he was not equipped to do. Who are you to think anybody's going to come listen to you? Do you have any money? You don't have any money. Do you have any friends that have any money? Your friends don't have any money. How do you think you're going to have any way you're going to be able to start a church?" All these things. And for probably a year, I wrestled with them. What are we going to do? What am I going to do? And so I'm just doing this thing that I'm miserable in, and I know I'm supposed to do this, but I couldn't do this. I couldn't step through this. And it caused stagnation in me. And a lot of people do this, a lot of people sitting right here, you know you've done this. When you knew you needed to break through a wall, you needed to do something different, you stayed where you were because you could not step through that fear. You could not step through that unknown. And because you stay on this side, you never experience the growth and the growth that God wants for you, and you live a life of basic stagnation. Closer to home, a few years ago, I have felt this sense that I was supposed to be speaking not only here, but speaking outside of the church to people that aren't even connected to church. I was supposed to be doing that. But I didn't know how to do that. And then there was all the fears. What are people going to think if they see me write a book that's not about Jesus, but it's about time management, because I want to be able to stand in front of groups of people and talk to them about an area of my life that I've screwed up royally, which is managing time. And I want to teach people that principle. What will people think? I'll be judged. My church people will judge me. This is going to be a horrible thing. Or what if I start a blog and it doesn't have Jesus in every other sentence? Maybe people will think I don't love Jesus. And what are they going to, all these things. I went through all of these things. And so I just was stuck, stagnant. I knew I was supposed to do this. I knew I was supposed to take the next step, and God's growing me into the man I'm supposed to be. Well, I finally did. I remember when I finally wrote my first blog that was not a pastor blog to a church. It was to people outside of the church. I just wrote a blog. I think it was on fear, actually. But I wrote that blog, and I felt so alive because I felt like I was growing now. I wasn't over here where I had always kind of camped. I was doing something I sensed God was telling me to do. And every new experience, I feel like I'm growing. My point is, you will be stuck and you won't grow if you don't overcome your fear. It's very, very important. Third thing is this: if you live with a fear mindset, it'll cost you your joy. You cannot be joy-filled if fear, it doesn't exist. It can't coexist. Fear and joy cannot be coexistent inside of you. You have to have one or the other. If you want to walk in joy, you've got to say no to fear. If you want to say yes to fear, you can't walk in joy. Paul said to Timothy, he said, for the Spirit God gave us doesn't make us timid, doesn't make us fearful, but it gives us power. It gives us love. It gives us self-discipline. My experience has been nothing gives me joy like feeling God's power and feeling God's love and feeling God's discipline in my life. Nothing gives me more satisfaction and joy. And as long as fear's on the throne in my life, I don't experience that. Another cost is this: if you live with a fear mindset, it will lead to a mountain of regret. That's probably my biggest fear. It will lead to a mountain of regret at the end of your life for all the risk you never took, all the challenges you never embraced, all the times that God said to you, come on and trust me, and you said no. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. You'll be left with a mountain of regret. Think about God in the Bible. He calls Abraham and he says, Abraham, I want you to follow me to a place you don't even know where I'm going. Now let me tell you why that's a significant deal. Prior to Abraham in the history of the world, people in their understanding of God saw their gods were local. They didn't move. They stayed here. This is their gods. This is where they stay. Nobody says, I think I'm going to move to California. They just stayed where they were. It's the first time in recorded history we have someone saying, I sense God telling me to go there. But he will be with me there. I know he's with me here. He'll be with me there. So Abraham, father of faith, follows God's voice. I think about God to Moses. Moses, I want you to stand up to the leader of the day who's been being brutal to your people, and I want you to say, let my people go. How frightening that had to be. But Moses said, okay, and he did it. Or God saying to Daniel, I want you to not bow to the king. And when you're thrown in the lion's den, I don't want you to be afraid. And Daniel went to the lion's den and he wasn't afraid. And then I think of Jesus saying to someone, give away your wealth. Give away your wealth. Live the adventure with me. And I wonder if we could ask Abraham, was it worth it, Abraham? You followed God, you stepped out, you didn't let it shut you down. Or did you have regrets? He'd say, not since I said yes to following God. That was huge. Or you say to Moses, Moses, regrets? Absolutely no regrets. When I finally said yes to God, the greatest thing could ever happen. Or to Daniel, did you have regrets? Was that something that really, regrets that you said yes to God? No, it was me coming to the realization of who I really was in God. But I wonder if we could have found that rich young ruler and said, any regrets? Wonder if when he got older, he didn't sit around and say, wonder what might have happened if I had said yes to that Nazarene. Wonder what might have happened had I not put all of my trust and faith in my wealth, but I put my trust and faith rather in his message about God. I wonder. One of my biggest fears is looking in the mirror one day And already, you know, at my age, you look in the mirror and you say, good God, this is not good. This is what's happening. What is happening to me? But I don't want to look in the mirror one day and say, look at the mountains of regret I have because I didn't. Listen, many of you have been through broken relationships and you've said, absolutely not, I cannot trust again. Might be a regret. Might be a regret. Maybe that's a fear that you need to break through. Maybe that person who's always dreamed of that job, you've known this job, you're supposed to put in for this job, it's what you want to do, but you've never had the courage. Maybe it's starting your own business, but you've never had the courage. Don't live with a mountain of regret. One more, if you live with a fear mindset, you'll find it's contagious. You'll find it's contagious. One of the saddest things in the world to me is when you see mom and dad and they are fear-based and kids grow up and they are fear-based. And one of the things that I wanted to do with my kids is I wanted to give them certain freedoms and responsibilities and kind of throw them out there a little bit because I wanted them to know that this world is not an intimidating place. They can handle this thing. They can handle it. And they've proved that they could. I think about so many people and they watch the news and they're just paralyzed by fear. I remember being at the Varsity with my dad several months ago. And I just said, Dad, did you realize that there's less violent crime in our country now than the 1970s? And he said, there's no way. My dad's smart. He's the smartest man I know. And I said, I promise, Dad, there's less violent crime in the United States than the 1970s. And we looked it up. And he said, I had no idea. Why? Because the news makes you think police are getting killed at a rate unparalleled. That's not true. That's not true. That violent crime is at an all-time high, that's not true. But because people believe that, it just kind of spreads like wildfire and people are so afraid because fear is contagious. That's why you have to fight it because you don't want the people around you infected by fear. It will steal their lives. Well, let me give you quickly. Those are the things, if you don't get over fear, that's what's going to happen to you. But there's a few things you can do that I think will help you. One, and this may seem crazy, but talk to your fear. I stumbled upon this in a book by Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, but she also wrote a book this past year called Big Magic. And in that book, she said that she has to have talks with fear. She says that she treats fear as if he's kind of a companion. And she says, look, fear, I just want you to know I appreciate what you've done for me. I appreciate those times that you've warned me, don't get in that car because you're intoxicated or whatever, and this is a bad scene, don't do it. And I have heeded your voice, and I just want you to know, fear, thank you for all those times. I know you're trying to look out for me. I know you're trying. But she says sometimes she has to say, but fear, writing a new book, stepping out and beginning to write a new book, I've got this. Stand down. Stand down. When anxiety comes, Jane and I laugh about this all the time. We'll say, I had a talk with fear today and I had to remind it. Fear, I appreciate all you've done. You've helped me a lot. I appreciate it. There's a lot of good fear and I appreciate that. But I need you to stand down today because today I've got some phone calls I need to make that I'm a little bit nervous about, but I've got to make those phone calls. I've got to say those things I need to say. And so I just want you to know, fear, you can rest today. I've got this. Maybe that'll help you just a little bit, just something to think about. It's important. It's important. Second thing I want to say is this. You need to remember, and I have to remember this, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I am never alone. When God tells us to fear not, he always gives us a reason you don't have to fear. And you know what it is? I'm with you. I am with you. Fear not, for the Lord your God shall be with you, the Bible says. The psalmist writes, the Lord is my strength and my salvation. Of whom shall I be afraid? Jesus said, in this world you'll have tribulation, but don't worry, I've overcome the world and I'm with you always. Fear not, for I'm with you, God says, and there is nothing that you and I can't handle together. Jesus never tired of teaching about this. Jesus would say to the people, you're anxious and worried and afraid of so many things, but look at the birds in the air. See how they're not worried? See how they just trust God? And he would say, look at the lilies of the field. Solomon in all of his glory was never arrayed as they are. But they don't worry. They trust the God of the universe. And how much more valuable are you to God than they? I'm never alone. One of my favorite movies, and this came out a long time ago, but it's timeless. It's a movie, and it's not animated. It's a real movie with animals, and it's called The Bear. I don't know if you saw this or not, but it's called The Bear. And it's about a bear cub whose mother dies. And this bear cub is suddenly out in the wilderness by himself. And you think, oh my God, what is going to happen to the bear cub? But for his benefit, a big grizzly bear, daddy bear kind of shows up and adopts him in bear ways, I guess, adopts the baby bear. And it's so cool to watch because he'll teach the baby bear how to grub for worms, and he'll teach the baby bear how to fish, and he'll get up against a big tree and he'll scratch his big bear back, and then you'll see the little bear, he's learning these things, so he'll scratch his little back. It's a real cool movie, and then you realize that there has been a mountain lion who has stalked the baby bear his entire life. Since the mother died, he has stalked this baby bear. He's always off in the distance, but he has stalked. And one day, the baby bear drifted away from his dad, the big, strong, grizzly bear, Kodiak bear, whatever kind of bear it was. And suddenly the baby bear realizes he's in danger. Watch. Kind of teared up when I see that, because that's what it's like. That little bear, when it finally goes, and that lion begins to back down, and don't you know that little baby bear thought for just a minute, hey, this is working. And then he turns around and he sees, whoa, God is with you. God is with you. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be afraid. Let me tell you one other thing that I try to remember all the time, and it's this. I need to accept this about life. I don't have to be afraid of the rain. I can accept that scary storms are going to come my way, but I don't have to be afraid of the rain. Scary storms will come my way, but I don't have to be afraid of the rain. My prayer for each of you is you'll seriously think, is fear locking me down? And you'll realize God says, I'll see you through.